Hi, it's Dave here. This is my wife, Cathy.
Hello.
And this is the Cinemile, the podcast where we walk home from the movies. And Happy New Year to you in the future. It is not New Year right now. Today is the 26th of December when we're recording this. It is St. Stephen's Day in Ireland, or Boxing Day in the UK, or whatever it is called in other parts of the world. So, big cinema day today. But only one of us has decided to go to the cinema. Cathy, tell them what you are going to see without me.
I'm going to see Napoleon because some of you may remember, long-term listeners, pre-COVID, my dad used to come on the podcast a fair bit, and he was our history correspondent. So as soon as I heard about Napoleon coming out, I said, Dad, you have to come on and watch it and talk about it. We're not able to go together, so what we're doing is we're going separately. He's already seen it. I'm seeing it today. Going to the cinema on my own on Boxing Day, a totally normal thing to do, and then to watch a 3-hour movie. And then when we go up to my dad's house for a couple of days, I'm going to record with him his thoughts and his feelings about the movie and the history.
And I hear this is incredibly historically inaccurate, or at least that's what the headlines I'm reading. And apparently Ridley Scott is out there just saying "F you" to everybody. It's a movie. To hell with you guys.
I am unspoiled for this film because I don't know anything about Napoleon, and I haven't seen any trailers. So to me, this will all be new, whether it's accurate or not.
Please ask your dad. I really want to know the insides outs of this. Apparently the French are very unhappy. All of France has disregarded this movie.
Also, it stars Joaquin Phoenix, which seems unusual to me or odd. I don't see him as a Napoleon, but he's a very good actor. But just in a general sense, I'm thinking Ridley Scott, Gladiator, Joaquin Phoenix, I'm expecting this to be good. I don't mind that it's going to be long because it's like holidays and I'm off work and I'm going to an afternoon screening. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And I can't wait to have my dad back on the podcast because it's been years.
Yes, I am. I'm looking forward to listening to this.
I think
much more than I would be if I'm not sad I'm missing this at all. I have no interest in seeing this. Honestly, it just looks like a big old bore. I'm not really big into big epics. I do love Gladiator, and I think Ridley Scott can do a fantastic epic scene. But I don't know. I just have zero interest in this. So
I was checking the last time Dad came on, and I think it was. Remember when I went to see The Favourite without you? I think that
I need to catch up on that.
I think I did a dial-in with Dad after that where he gave us the real history of that era.
Right.
So that was quite fun. So anyway, next time you hear, I will be back with my dad, and right now Dave is going to insert a trailer for Napoleon.
Yeah, and I'm off to eat some roses and leftovers. Bye.
Roses, the chocolate, not the flower.
Oh yeah. Bye.
No doubt you're seeing the chaos in the streets. We must make an example, or France will fall.
What would you do if this assignment of defense was transferred to you?
I promise you brilliant successes. Everyone around is...
What is this costume you have on?
This is my uniform. So near. I led the French victory at Toulon.
What is your name?
Napoleon.
As the course of my life just changed. Napoleon.
Right, I am back with my dad, Jimmy. Welcome back, Dad.
Welcome, Cathy. Good to be here.
It's been ages since we've had you on the podcast.
Has been a while, all right, but this might be the right time.
The right book is next to us. So I'm in Dad's house, and he was showing me this book he has that he's been referring back to, The Age of Napoleon. Turns out, when I opened it, I gave it to Dad for his 45th birthday. We won't say how long ago that was, Dad.
Fair enough.
This is amazing. He's got notes on the margin. He's the man for this podcast. So, Dad, firstly, tell me...
A little footnote. It is 20 years ago, so please bear with me now.
Were you excited when you heard this movie was coming out?
Yeah, I like the sound of it.
Mm-hmm.
I like the sound of it because there's a wonderful story to be told about this era. Brutal and all as it was, it's a wonderful story, an epic story.
Yeah. And after seeing the film, which we've both now seen, sadly separately, what are your kind of overall impressions on the film before we get into spoilers on the historical inaccuracies? How did you feel watching it?
I thought the film was the cinemascope, if that's the word. I thought was excellent. All the costumes and the settings and that. I thought the battle scenes. Not that I've ever been in a battle, but I think they did justice more or less to the brutality of war, which I was glad to see. I thought the music was lovely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
thought the music was a gem. I thought the acting was good, and I thought the film for what they covered was too long.
Right. Okay. And how did you feel about Joaquin Phoenix as Napoleon?
I'd say he was good. Mm-hmm. I didn't notice any inadequacies in his portrayal of him. I'd say he was good. And as far as I would know, I'd say he was good in it.
And how did you feel about the centering of the film around his relationship with Josephine, and then like punctuated by battles, which I thought was an interesting way to frame, because a biopic can be framed in a million ways, right? And this one, I guess the director chose to do it that way. How did you feel about that as a device?
As a device, I think it worked, even though I think they overplayed the time between himself and Josephine. But it meant, therefore, the film was restricted. Mm-hmm. It was restricted to that aspect of his life, himself and Josephine, and his military story to the extent that they cover the military story. One could have come at the life of Napoleon or the Napoleonic era. You could have come at it through half a dozen other angles. Mm-hmm. To give us an example, you could have come at it through, like, say, a country that was very significant for Poland. What did it mean for Poland? Or for the re-emerging of Poland? As an example, you could have come at it through the lens of Poland. Mm-hmm. Indeed, you could have come at it through the lens of Ireland. Mm-hmm. There's so many ways you could have come at it. Mm-hmm. But you could have come through it through the lens of Corsica, where he was from. But it didn't even attempt to touch any of them. Mm-hmm. It just looked at it through the lens of himself and Josephine and the military affairs. Mm-hmm. Which, if that's what he chooses to do, good luck to him.
Yeah. I find it interesting because I'm very ignorant of the era, and in fact when I started watching it I realised I thought Napoleon had been about 200 years before he actually was. Like, it's relatively recent, which I don't think I'd quite realise.
There you go.
Yeah, like quite how recent it was. I obviously famously knew about him and Josephine in the letters, that I was aware of, and then I was aware of Waterloo because of the ABBA song. And I have to say, I really didn't know anything else about him, despite apparently buying you this book a long time ago that I don't remember buying. So for me, it was really interesting. But I think what I didn't feel, albeit there was dates flashing up on screen and I could tell a lot of time was passing, I never felt the passage of time, because I think they cast an actor way too old. Like, I think they should have started with someone who was young and then aged him up. Because effectively, he kind of looks the same for the whole film. I got a bit confused as to where it was. In retrospect, in hindsight, I realised himself and Josephine might have been only married for like 15 years. So I don't think it felt long enough. I don't think for me, it didn't feel like it was really his story. And then the stuff that I was really interested in, the kind of famous stuff about him being like a military strategist, I really felt like that in the very first battle we saw him in, where we saw him really thinking about what he was going to do. Mm-hmm. And so I felt like I saw his strategy there. But then as it went on, I failed to see what has been reported as his military brilliance, whether or not it's true. I didn't really see any of that. And I also failed to see his ambition. Like, I never really understood as a character why he was doing anything, because the film's so punctuated by just these battle scenes and then the stuff with Josephine. But the stuff with Josephine I loved. I think she's brilliant, the actress who played her, and I thought their scenes were very funny, and I think maybe intentionally funny. Like, how did you find the kind of marital scenes between them?
But just if I could go back to a point you mentioned about it, like, he didn't age. Like, the Napoleon, his era as the top dog was very short. Mm-hmm.
But from beginning to end of the movie was about 40 years, was it, in battles?
No, not at all.
See, I couldn't grasp that.
Not at all. Not at all. Not at all.
And again, I think that's a filmmaking issue, because I couldn't figure out the passage.
Yeah, but I think that the his era might have lasted, I don't know, give or take 10 or 12 years.
But what about, though, not so much his era, but the very first, like, when we open on the Marie Antoinette stuff and we end on him in exile.
That was, you know, that era was only about that, say, from the time she was executed to he came home between his tail between his legs from Russia, it was only about 12 or 13 years or something like that.
Oh, okay. Well, even then I'm confused by the passage of time.
Yeah.
But
so you weren't looking at, because it was a very short period. Like you're not looking at a 40-year span or anything like it.
okay, so that's hilarious because that's what I thought I was watching even as the film
Yeah,
was
but
unfolding.
you could say that in a way that the film didn't illustrate how much was happening over such a short period.
Yeah.
Because like Europe turned, the history of Europe turned between the French Revolution and Napoleon's time, and then his kind of final defeat, and then it turned again. It turned defeat following his defeat. So there was epic upheaval in Europe, first in one direction and then in another.
Yeah, I feel like the film on one hand thought the audience knew a lot, which I didn't, so maybe stuff was lost on me. But then on the other side, for what I've seen since, the director, he's been kind of going, well, it doesn't matter what really happened in real life, I just want to make my movie the way I want to make it. So it's kind of hard to watch, I think, and understand what's going on, I found. But what I really did enjoy was the relationship with him and Josephine. I found it very funny. I thought their scenes were quite hilarious. I don't know what you thought about them, or how it kind of portrayed him as a very odd man.
Well, if I was to go back, I'm not 100% sure where I got my information from. It might have been, and to give credit where credit is due, The Age of Napoleon by J. Christopher Herald. But there was a kind of a joke about Napoleon and Josephine, that there was a slight misunderstanding when they got together, which is that each of them thought the other had money. Which was not the case.
Right.
Like they might have had, I think they both had kind of aristocratic type backgrounds of one form or another, but neither of them had any money.
That's interesting, because even that confused me in the movie, because at one point she's like, do I look like an aristocrat? And she appears to have a couple of kids. And then as the film goes on, they don't have more kids, and I got very confused by what was going on. And I don't think the film spent overly long in details of how they interact together, which is quite funny, but then no time on the details, which again left me a bit confused.
So in other words, like the context was very limited.
Yeah.
And there was an awful lot of scenes of him looking at her and her looking at him, or various other shenanigans, but the context was not really presented.
Exactly, that's exactly what I felt like. And then in terms of the large scale battles, like they looked incredible. It's undeniable how good they look, and I think, to your point on the brutality of war, they're also very distressing, and I think they're supposed to be, and
rightly so.
Yeah.
I was kind of glad at that, because like war should not be glorified.
Yeah, and when you really see the scale of it, like these millions of men just marching around Europe to their death, it's quite shocking.
But if I could pick up on the historical, even on the battles things, like it showed like in his early days when he was kind of a, shall we say, relatively lowly in the military, he obviously was a very able military commander. If he had stayed at that as a military commander, him and France might have been a lot better off. And then his ego, as I see it, got just completely out of hand. I've no reason to believe, as the years went on, that he was serving France. He was serving himself. Like what France could provide for him and his ego and his family was the name of the game. And it eventually caught up with him, this kind of delusion that he was a kind of a semi-god nearly. Militarily, though, there was one thing that I would like to point out. Like in the film, it was presented that he had all these successes under his belt, and then things went wrong obviously very badly wrong, in Russia. There was no mention of Spain in the film whatsoever. He had a Spanish campaign that turned into a disaster, that had many of the characteristics of the Russian one. It didn't have the weather one, at least not to the same degree, but it had many of the same characteristics. That the large numbers of people in Spain, they weren't having this. They weren't having Napoleon and his French army taking control of their country. They just weren't going to have it. Doesn't matter what the price was going to be, they weren't going to have it. As in Russia, the people were not going to have it. So one could say, if he had been a bit more alert, he would have seen, or at least he might have learnt his lesson in Spain. But I thought it very, like, I know there was battles all over Europe, but I thought it was remiss really that Spain wasn't mentioned at all in the film, even from looking at it through the lens of the of war, because the French got their nose bloodied in in Portugal Spain, if they had learnt their lesson, if he had learnt his lesson, they might have realised that you can't just present a big army and expect everybody to fall down in front of you. Some people will and other people won't, regardless of the price. So he could have learnt a lesson in Spain, but he chose not to.
I guess that didn't suit the narrative of the film, where it's like they're building and he's building and kind of ready for a fall.
Yeah, well, in terms of historical inaccuracies, like, I'm no expert on details. Like, I hear people say that he couldn't have been in Paris when Marie Antoinette was beheaded.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah, no, but for me, that's a technical detail. Like, he was around Paris in those times, and he would have been close enough to absorb what had been happening. Whether he was there on the day or not, I think is a technical detail around the story to be told. So I'd have no quibble with that.
Yeah.
Now, in the Spanish situation, there was nothing wrong in the film about Spain, except for the fact that it was completely omitted.
Yeah, interesting. And I think what I thought when the film opened, I was like, because I was very unsure going into it. I thought, it's very long and I don't know if I'm going to enjoy it or not. And when it opened on the Marie Antoinette scenes and straight into the French Revolution, I got really into it. I was like, this is a very epic film. I thought that was a great way to open it. And I think, to your point earlier on the costumes and the setting and the music, I was with it the whole time. Like, I really thought I was going to get bored in this film. I never did. I never minded the length of it. I have to say, I was really into it. And there's one other thing I want to talk about before we go to spoilers. So, how did you feel about the fact that in this film, everyone has a British accent or mildly European accent, and then Joaquin Phoenix has an American accent? How did you feel about it?
Didn't even register with me.
Okay, interesting.
The only person whose accent who registered with me was Wesley, the Duke of Wellington.
Yeah. He was great. Yeah, that was Rupert Everett.
Yeah, like he was born in Ireland, and he's a guy I have actually quite a lot of respect for.
Right.
Yeah, I think certainly the Irish presentation of him historically, I think, has been unbalanced. To pick as an example, like the Catholic emancipation was a big issue, a huge issue in Ireland. And if you ask anybody who do they think about Catholic emancipation, they think of Daniel O'Connell. But Daniel O'Connell had to do a deal with somebody. And who was the deal with the British Prime Minister who was willing and able to make the deal with him? It was Wesley. So he felt like he came from very modest roots. He had ultimately a very successful campaign in Spain, Portugal against the French. He had that under his belt. He was a man probably from more modest roots than Napoleon was. So I just thought that even though they didn't dwell on him very long, I think they didn't do justice to that character, whatever they did about his accent.
Oh, interesting. I really liked his performance, though. He's a great actor. It bugged me no end that Napoleon had an American accent. Like, it infuriated me. I understand it's ridiculous, but when you're making films in English, to an extent, I understand you give everyone like a generic British/European accent. I get it, albeit it bothers me. I struggled with the film because there was just so many men. It was like a tidal wave of male actors, nominally from different European countries. But because they all had British accents, maybe the Russian guy had twang of a Russian accent, I couldn't follow what countries he was talking to, which I find very hard. Sometimes names would flash on screen, sometimes they wouldn't. So because I had no historical context.
Actually, on that front, at the end of the film, when they listed all the actors, like I could recognise who a lot of these characters were meant to be playing in real life. But in the film, I couldn't.
Yeah, so even you didn't know who they were.
No, I couldn't identify who. Like, I didn't know who was speaking an awful lot of the time.
Right, yeah, and I didn't. And then Joaquin Phoenix American accent just like set me nuts. I couldn't. I thought it was.
We all have issues, Cathy.
The laziest thing.
It didn't bother me.
I take it fine. He wasn't going to put on a French or a Corsican accent because everyone around him was British. But surely he's a good actor. He could do a British accent.
Well, can I just put something back to yourself? Like, did it change your opinion about Napoleon, or did it inform your opinion about Napoleon watching the film?
I truly have no opinion of Napoleon, so I couldn't possibly have. So I still don't have much of an opinion because I don't, believe that that any of the love scenes we saw between him and Josephine, for example, are based on anything. The letters interested in me, and I loved hearing the letters, and I do want to go off and read all the letters now, because I think that's an incredible piece of history that those letters have been captured. But then what was sending me nuts was when Joaquin Phoenix was writing to her, he was like, please, why don't you write me? I was like, only modern Americans say write me. In the English language, it's write to me. So again, I was infuriated by this. I've read interpretations of the film where people think by the fact that he spoke in a modern cadence, a modern method of speech, and in an American accent was to demonstrate how he's an outlier, this Corsican guy in France. But I think that's giving it too much credit. I don't think that's what.
Well, I wouldn't be hung up on that at all. Like, I think I remember right. I think it's actually his first language would have been Italian. Yeah. Like, and he was probably writing to herself in French, presumably. So the fact that he's American accent doesn't bother me, Cathy.
Okay, now we're going to go to spoilers on it, so I'm going to pause for a quick break, and you might hear an ad, and then we'll be back. We're back. Dad, this is what you came for. We need to get into the historical inaccuracies, or accuracies. How do you feel? How do you rate the film? And I know you said, I take your point about the fact that you don't mind particular tiny details around, like whether or not he was in Paris. But in an overall sense, how accurate do you think what we saw was?
Yeah, well, like in the sense that you're going to, how do you say the word? Dramatize something. Mm-hmm. To the extent of the historical details that I know, I have no difficulty with what was presented in the film. Mm-hmm. As I said, like Spain, but lots of I have a difficulty, but so much was left out and not referred to at all. Mm-hmm. That's the difficulty I have.
What do you feel about, I've seen a lot of people giving out about the Egyptian scene.
I think I missed that, in the sense, I was looking at it. What did it show him blowing up the pyramids? Yeah.
Which never happened.
Yeah, no, but which I hadn't seen. Right,
okay.
But at least it didn't register with me. Mm-hmm. But again, it, well, I suppose that there is a thing in that is, there is probably a twist in that now that you say it, that I would take issue with, because he did bring a lot of very learned people with him to Egypt. And they made, they did a huge amount of research about Egyptian culture. Mm-hmm. And that was very significant in a scientific sense. So I suppose in that regard, it shows him blowing up the pyramids, whereas in fact he was doing a lot of research while he was there. At least he had teams of people doing research while he was there. That doesn't ring true at all.
Yeah, Ridley Scott said that it was his shorthand of saying, he took Egypt and that's how he did it. But I don't think that was necessary, because he says in the letter to Josephine that he's taking Egypt, so we could hear it. And I think visually, for me as a total ignorant person in the setting, I watched the film and went, wait, what? He blew up pyramids? That's awful. I can't believe he's done that. It felt weird.
I know. Maybe he was using it, but that because he used such force. But also, I suppose now that you mention it, what the film didn't pick up, that Egyptian campaign was not a success.
And it implied it was.
In a military point of view, that was not a success, that campaign.
Mm-hmm. The implication was it was a success.
That's right. It was the way it was kind of presented in the scheme of successes, it was presented as if it was a success, mm-hmm. but it wasn't.
The one that really struck me visually, so the very first battle scene we saw, which I thought, because we've 3 really big battle scenes. We've the one when he's early on in his career and they scale the walls and they use the Brits' own cannons to bomb their own ships, which I thought was a brilliant scene. His horse gets hit by a cannon. Like, it was all very visually interesting. That battle scene I really enjoyed. The next big battle scene, a much more brutal one, was was it against the Austrians and the Russians?
Or some kind of combination. Yeah. And I'm not going to attempt to say that word, because I can't say it. It begins with an A. Yeah. And they say that was his greatest military success.
Though interestingly, on the quibbles I've been reading since, because I've not read up on the history, I've just read up on the quibbles people have with the history. So the way the movie kind of brilliantly showed him herding everyone onto this, what turned out to be a frozen lake, and all these people going under. Apparently that's very inaccurate, and there was just a couple of patches of ice that 10 people fell through, but his own myth and legend, he said it happened the other way.
Well, there was no better man for propaganda than Napoleon. Mm-hmm. And his Egyptian campaign was not a success, but him and his chroniclers would have written it up as a success.
And that's probably why the letter to Josephine said, he said, "I'm taking Egypt."
Yeah. And well, in fact, Wesley was famous for the same thing. If he liked to think that he never had a defeat. So he said to his henchman, or his aide was, he says, after a few quite setbacks, he says, "Come on, write me up a victory." So naturally he wrote him up a victory.
Yeah, well, that makes sense then, because apparently it's totally untrue, this ice thing. However, it's presented as true.
But I wouldn't, but again, to a certain degree, I think they're probably just illustrating that this guy was a very brilliant commander.
Yeah.
He could come up with ideas that other people couldn't, and use them and utilize them. And he did have an astounding military success with against much greater forces than he had. So if he didn't think outside the box, he wasn't going to win.
Yeah.
But obviously he was a very good man for thinking outside the box when he was younger.
I think how it was visualized
Sorry, not that he wasn't that much younger, but shall we say in the first half of his reign, perhaps.
Yeah, how it was visualized by Ridley Scott, the ice stuff. It was like it was unbelievable. It looked incredible.
Yeah. Also, that scene was probably overplayed. It went on and on.
Yeah.
You know, the ice thing. Given that it isn't historically correct, like that was taking the dramatization too far.
Yeah, and it's funny. I was sitting there thinking, well, this must have happened, or wouldn't be in the film. Like, I am surprised. Like, as a filmmaker, when I'm watching a historical film, as a film viewer, I generally think that I'm watching something fairly accurate. The other big, I guess, one of the big set pieces was, and I knew nothing about this, when they landed in Russia and then the city was burned down around them. That was fascinating.
Well, that's correct.
Yeah, I thought that was really fascinating. And then they say, "Let's keep going." And even his own kind of sergeant is like, "That's a terrible idea." And I think that's when the film shows that he's losing it, because he just walks in anyway.
Well, he didn't keep going.
What? I thought
Like when
after the city burned down, I thought they kept pushing into Russia further.
No.
Oh.
No, he did. They did turn around and come home.
Oh, see, I didn't get that from the film.
Yeah, no. In the film, he says like, "Well, we'll keep after these guys," and it showed his commander saying, "No, we can't do it."
Ah, okay. And I thought he didn't take the advice.
No, he did take the advice. Didn't
okay.
like it maybe, but he did. Yeah.
God, and they lost that many people anyway, just walking back through the winter.
Well, that's when they were most exposed.
Yeah.
That is when they lost their they lost it.
That was shocking. And what about the scene then, the final scene, the Waterloo scene? Is there some implication in that it was due to the weather that he lost because it was so wet, or is that just?
Well, I think there is. To that, I can't speak to that, Cathy, but there is this that if the Prussians had not arrived, and they arrived just in time, I think that's accepted by all and sundry. Like if they had arrived, I'm not sure how much later they would have had to be, but if they had arrived later, he would at that point have had defeated the British.
Right. Okay.
And at that probably was the strategy. And at that point, they would have the full French forces to deal with the Prussians. But the way it happened, and whether it was for the weather reason or whatever reason, that he had to contend with both of them at the one time, and that sealed his fate.
It was. I found that scene really distressing, and just all these young men lined up with guns, just killing each other. Like, it's an awful thing to watch.
Well, can I speak in a slightly broader sense?
Yeah.
Like, for me, it is beyond me why Napoleon has a positive reputation.
Yeah.
It is beyond me. Like, even his own lifetime, and as somebody said, the children of the widows he'd left behind hadn't even grown up before the reputation of the great Napoleon started to appear.
Yeah.
Like, the number of corpses that he left behind because of his ego is beyond. I can't say how many hundreds of thousands of people he left dead, and all the consequences for each and all of them. And you could say, like, and the film did not change my kind of view or opinion on it. Like, in his early days, you can say that he served his country, and in his later days, he wreaked havoc on his country and the countries around him. And in fairness, the film did give a few figures. The film did give a few figures at the end about it, but that referred to these specific battles. So the number,
and that was millions, and that wasn't even all the battles.
Yeah. So the number of wasted lives, is just astounding. And like the campaign, some of the wars that were fought in the early years, they were wars of kind of survival for France, the new France, you can say, and he played a role in that. But his traipsing into Russia was an ego trip, and his traipsing into Spain was an ego trip, and you know, with hundreds of thousands of lives lost in both countries. So I'm afraid what I can admire, the man obviously had ability, the destruction that he brought in his own lifetime, and the legacy that he left afterwards, it's for me is kind of catastrophic disasters.
Yeah, I feel like the film, I still don't quite know what the film was at, because the film gave us all those numbers in the end, in the credits, which I found really impactful. But I don't, and those battle scenes, particularly Waterloo, like we saw a really horrific loss of life for everyone, and it was a really sad thing to watch. But I still never felt like, you know, you come out of a film, you're like, what was the message of that film? What were they trying to show me?
Yes, yeah.
I think the film really wanted me to know that he loved Josephine. And then the film wanted me to know that ultimately loads of people died. But I don't know that the film had a view on Napoleon.
Yeah, but he didn't love her enough not to dump her.
Yeah, but it was for his country, because apparently everyone needed an heir of Napoleon.
Pardon?
It's like the implication was he was like selflessly like, I need an heir for this country, which is hilarious because he could have just abdicated.
But isn't that nonsensical?
Yeah, it is nonsense. Yeah, absolutely nonsense.
So I'm just saying, like, picking up on your point, if he loved her that much, he didn't love her that much.
Yeah, I know.
His ego was more important to him than Josephine.
It was, and I actually was looking up afterwards the son, what happened to him, and I'm very sad actually. Apparently the son died when he was like 20, so he died. He had no heirs anyway.
Well, that's not quite true, Cathy.
Oh, whoa.
He had was it
legitimate? Sorry, by the day.
No, but he had we have Napoleon. A couple of generations we have Napoleon III. Now, what was the relationship with Napoleon I and Napoleon III?
I think he was an uncle, was he?
He could have been an uncle.
Yeah, because Napoleon VIII is around now.
Oh, good for him.
He's like my age.
But Napoleon III, he became a powerful emperor as well.
Right.
Partly on the back of the name that he carried.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he went off to leave France an awful lot. He did some good, and he went off to leave France an awful lot worse after the end of his outing as an emperor. So I think that's one of the legacies that Napoleon I left.
Mm-hmm.
This propaganda picture of the great France and Napoleon up on his horse and all this nonsense that drives people to lose their senses nearly, chasing after something that is, their own behaviour can be horrific, but they couch it in a kind of glamour.
Interestingly, this film has not gone down well in France. The French don't appreciate it. And Ridley Scott said, well, the French don't even like themselves as a rebuttal.
Yeah, well, one of the things I do not understand in France why Napoleon is popular. I do not, but he is. Yeah. At least in a certain quarters, because like the immediate legacy when he got the bullet is that the Bourbons were back, and even in his own time he undid, at least in my view, he undid the driving forces of the revolution, which were, what were they? Liberty, equality, was it freedom?
By crowning himself. By the way, this is embarrassing, but I never even knew he became an emperor. So.
Yeah, so where's the equality gone with that?
Yeah.
But, and even more, I'm sorry now the film didn't bring out this point. Like after the French Revolution, one of the first things they did was abolish slavery in the French colonies. Napoleon reimposed slavery in Haiti. And I think that's a terrible blot on his character, to reimpose slavery. So he could have been a bridge between a turbulent era in France, with the benefits, shall we say, of the revolution, into a modern state. But because his ego took off, not only did he not bring it forward, he caused this havoc and destruction, and he set it back. He set it back, and these Bourbons got back again into power, and all that went with that.
Yeah, very interesting. What I kind of gleaned from this in a general sense was that I'd love to get into exile because you get to live in a tropical island. And what did he get? £1 million a year?
I can't say on that. Yeah.
it seemed like he got a very good deal, and I don't know why he ever came back from it. And he got a very good deal again. So 2 exiles ain't bad for what is a warmonger or war criminal. Anyway, Dad, thank you so much for coming back on the podcast. It's been too long. We need to look out for more historical movies next year for you to come talk about.
Okay, I'd be glad to. But one of the things, like, you know, even poor old Ireland, you know, they were singing songs in Ireland, you know, hoping that Napoleon or somebody belonging to him might show up to help out. Yeah. Well, they can sing on.
Oh no. Well, speaking of singing on, usually Dave and I end the episodes with some music from the film, but we decided not to do that today because we have Dad here, who's our special guest, and has released a CD and has just released a song from it called La Noche Buena.
On YouTube.
So I'm going to link to the song in the show notes, so please click on and check out his YouTube. He's also on Bandcamp. And tell us the name of your album, Dad.
Time and Tide, Celtic Echoes.
And tell us a bit about your album.
First of all, I want to apologise in advance for any mistakes that I have made in this broadcast. And I'm only a learner, and so please advise me if I got anything wrong.
He is not a Napoleonic expert, we do have to say, but he knows a lot about him.
Yeah. A little bit about the album?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The album was an attempt to pull together to paint a picture, as it were, of my musical interests, which have evolved over a lifetime. And they would have, so ultimately what I said, I'll try and get a song from each of the areas, or a piece of music from each of the areas that I'm interested in, and see if I can get them to standard. I'll go for 2 of each. So I didn't quite make 2 of each, but I ended up with I think it's 5 and 6 and 5, 11 tracks. So we have some Irish songs, Irish. Give it a try. This is not any particular order. There's Irish, English, Scottish, American. There's a song from each one of them. There's a couple of pieces by Turlough O'Carolan, the Irish composer I'm very fond of. We have a traditional set of tunes, and then we have a number of my own self-compositions. The one that Cathy's going to line up is the La Noche Buena, which actually is in Spanish, Christmas Eve. And because it got that title because it finished on Christmas Eve, one night in Andalusia. So there's a little bit about the album.
Brilliant. And you don't know this, but we actually have a lot of Spanish listeners.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, buenas noches. Buenas noches. And espero que tu disfrutaría el CD Time and Tide. Yo necesito estudiar un nombre en español para este álbum. So another day. I'll have the name in Spanish.
Brilliant, thanks, Dad. So now you're going to hear La Noche Buena by Jimmy Cullen, and you're going to hear the whole track. Usually we can only play 30 seconds a track because we don't have rights, but Dad, do you permit us to play the full thing?
Oh, I couldn't refuse under these circumstances.
Okay, bye.
Adios.
and this is Go Love Yourself. And she went, you're 26? I was like, size 26, yeah. And she was like, oh, right, that makes sense.
This is the show where we're learning to love ourselves a little more and taking you along with us.
I grew up never seeing anybody that looked like me, and that made me feel like not part of society, like almost like not a woman, because I just never felt like I fit in.
If you've got a relative that is mean about your body, Laura, what do we say to them?